My name is Thomas Reed. I have 47 years old and I live in Los Angeles, California. I am, or at least I was, a full professor of neuroscience at UCLA, specializing in consciousness and perception. For much of my life, I have been known not only for my scientific papers, but for my relentlessly critical stance toward anything approaching spirituality, faith, or the afterlife. In lectures, in interviews, in my books, I made it clear, when we die, everything goes out. There is no light at the end of the tunnel. There is no soul, there is nothing. That was how I saw the world, cold, precise, logical. Any other discourse for me was a comforting illusion. This insight did not come out of nowhere. I grew up in a deeply religious home in rural Texas. My father was a Baptist minister. My mother was a sweet woman, but deeply marked by Christian guilt. When my younger brother died in an accident at age 9, I heard my father say, "It was God's will." It destroyed me inside. How could someone who was loving allow such a cruel tragedy to happen? From that moment on, God died to me. I turned my pain into fuel. I became obsessed with understanding the human brain. I wanted to find explanations for everything in neurons, emotions, morality, love, even near-death hallucinations. I would say, it's not the spirit leaving the body, it's just the cortex losing oxygen, and people would applaud. For 2 decades, my career took off. I won awards, sold books, and appeared on major television shows in the United States. And every time someone asked me if I believed in God, I would smile dismissively and reply, "I don't need myths, I have the science." But the truth is, deep down, there was an emptiness, a strange silence when I lay down at night, an unease with the fact that, despite all my knowledge, I was still afraid of death. On April 14th, 2023, everything changed. I was in New York speaking at the auditorium of Columbia University. The topic was provocative, as always: consciousness, product of the brain or illusion of the soul. The auditorium was packed. I was at my peak, and it was there, in the middle of my most cynical argument, that I felt a sudden pain in my chest, sharp, unrelenting. I tried to keep talking, but my legs gave out. The microphone fell from my hand, everything went black, and for the first time in my life, I knew I was going to die. If this story has touched you so far, if something inside you wants to understand where this goes, like this video and subscribe to the channel. What comes next is not just a change of belief, it is a transformation that will challenge everything you believe about life, death, and what lies beyond. That afternoon in New York, the sky was clear, but there was a strange weight in the air, something that only now, looking back, I can recognize. It was as if the entire universe knew what was about to happen, except me. The auditorium of the Columbia University, it was packed, over 800 people, students, teachers, skeptics, curious onlookers. I was the star of the show. I took the stage with the same confidence I always had, the bright lights in my eyes, the muffled sound of the audience murmuring, and that absolute silence that follows when everyone wants to hear what you have to say. I began with a provocation. You are here looking for answers, but you may not like the truth. There is no purpose. There is no soul. We are just sophisticated chemists trying to find meaning where there is none. Some laughed, others applauded. That was what they expected of me. I gave examples, cited experiments, brain resonance images. I talked about how the brain creates realities. And then I projected on the screen a sentence that summed up everything I believed. Death is the end. Accept it. It was at that moment that I felt the first twinge, right in the center of my chest. My fingers tingled. I thought it was anxiety, maybe tiredness from the trip. I took a sip of water. I kept talking, but the pain came back, more intense, radiating to my left arm. I tried to keep my composure. I took a deep breath. I took 2 more steps onto the stage and everything went dark. I heard screams. Someone ran toward me. The cold floor touched my face, and then nothing. It wasn't like sleep. It was like I had been ripped from myself. Absolute silence, no thoughts, no memories, just absence. I had ceased to exist for 12 minutes, according to doctors. From a clinical standpoint, I was dead, complete cardiac arrest. The heart stopped, the brain stopped, everything stopped. But that's not the most surprising part, because what came next, what I experienced in that interval between death and return, It would change everything I believed, everything I taught, everything I ridiculed. The moment my heart stopped, there was no pain, no fear, just an abrupt shutdown, as if someone had pulled the plug on my consciousness. A blackout, but that emptiness didn't last. I had always said that NDEs, near-death experiences, were tricks of the brain under stress, but here, at what was supposed to be my final end, something began to happen that no theory I had ever espoused could explain. In the beginning, everything was darkness. Not the darkness of a room without light. It was a total void, without time, without space. A nothingness that enveloped me and paradoxically made me feel present. I existed, without a body, without form, without structured thoughts. But Ira. And then there was a sound, a whisper, very soft, as if someone was calling my name from a distance. Thomas. I didn't hear it with my ears. I felt it, as if that voice resonated directly within me. It was a gentle presence, but impossible to ignore. The darkness began to dissolve. Slowly, a soft light appeared before me. It wasn't blinding. Instead, it seemed alive. It vibrated. It pulsed with something I can only describe as love. I wanted to resist. Part of me screamed, "This is a hallucination. You're dying. It's just your brain." But that other part, the one that always went silent when I went to bed at night, that part was at peace, like it had finally come home. I was drawn to that light. I didn't walk, I didn't fly, I just went, as if I was being pulled by an irresistible force, but at the same time I was constantly asking myself, do you want to see more? Yes, I wanted to. The light expanded until it filled everything, and in the middle of it, a figure appeared. It wasn't like seeing with my eyes, it was more like recognizing, as if I knew who it was before I even understood. A strong, intense presence, but wrapped in a compassion that completely disarmed me. And then I knew, without words, without doubt, Ira he, the man I spent my entire life denying, mocking, denying, Jesus. He didn't accuse me. He didn't condemn me. He just looked at me. And in that look, I saw everything, my arrogance, my hidden pains, my pride disguised as reason, my fear of death, my contempt for the faith of others. And at the same time, I saw understanding, mercy, a kind of gentle sadness, as if to say I was with you the whole time, and I still am. There was no voice, but there was communication, clear, direct, as if words were not necessary. And the only question that echoed within me was, are you ready to remember who you really are? At that moment, I knew I wasn't dreaming. It wasn't my brain dying. It wasn't a projection of my mind. It was real, and I was standing before something much greater than science had ever dared to touch. There before him, my whole life flashed before me, but not like a movie. It was as if each moment was imbued with emotion, with raw truth. I felt what others felt because of me. The words I had hurt, the times I had used my intellect to humiliate, the missed opportunities to love, to forgive. It was as if Jesus showed me everything, not to shame me, but to free me. He didn't speak, but I heard it. Inside me, clearly. You've been searching for truth all your life, Thomas, but you've only looked where you wanted to find it. I wanted to argue, to say that my skepticism was legitimate, that I was a victim of blind faith in childhood, that my rejection was a defense mechanism, but before him, the justifications dissolved. He already knew everything. I felt ashamed, but also a kind of love I had never known, a love that demanded nothing, that asked for no proof. That's simply error. There in front of that bright, intense light, I realized something devastating. I had dedicated my life to studying consciousness, but I had no idea what it really was. I believed that everything came from the brain, from matter. But now, I felt that there was something beyond, something eternal. And this eternity had consciousness, it had form, it had a name. And I stood before her. The images continued. I saw moments from my childhood that I no longer remembered. My mother singing hymns to me when I had a fever. My father praying quietly before bed. I saw a college friend who spoke to me gently about faith, and I ridiculed him in public. And I also saw the times when I almost gave up. The days when I thought about ending it all, hiding behind success. And there, I understood. In all those times, he was close by. He showed me how pain can be a teacher, how the absence of faith can actually be a thirst for something that logic cannot satisfy. I cried, not with tears, but with my soul. And I asked, or maybe I just wanted to know, If all this is real, why didn't you show it to me before? The answer came as a whisper. I never left. You're the one who screamed too loud for me to hear. It was at that moment that the light seemed to expand even more. And for a moment, I felt like I was on the edge of something even greater. A threshold between worlds, as if I could go forward or back. And then he gave me a choice, not with words, but with total clarity. You can stay or you can go back. But if you go back, you have to tell. Tell what I saw. Tell what I felt. Tell that the man who denied everything, found everything. I hesitated, because going back meant facing ridicule, losing prestige, maybe friends. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care what others thought. I wanted to live, but really live, not just exist. And that's when I replied with everything I had left, yes, I'll be back. And in the blink of an eye, everything disappeared. If this touched you, if any part of this experience resonated with you in your own journey, please write in the comments. Sometimes when we share, other people also find what they were looking for. When the light faded, I didn't wake up in the usual sense. I was taken or led to a different space. It wasn't heaven as I had imagined in paintings or religious descriptions of childhood. It was something larger, infinite, yet intimate. Everything around me seemed to be made of consciousness. There were no walls, no floor, no sky, but there was presence. I felt like I was inside something, or maybe somebody. Jesus was still with me, not before me now, but inside me, as if we were fused by an invisible thread of understanding. I didn't need to ask anything. He already knew, and he showed me. He revealed it to me. I saw the earth, small, suspended in darkness, a blue dot surrounded by billions of souls, some conscious, some asleep. And then I understood. Human existence is not a coincidence, not a cosmic accident. It is a mission, a process. We are born with veils of forgetfulness, of ego, of pride. And our journey is to slowly remove these veils. Each act of love, of forgiveness, of compassion, removes a piece of the fog and brings us closer to the source. But why the suffering, I thought? The answer came not in words but in images and feelings. I saw people go through tragedy, loss, deep pain, and still find the strength to love. I saw mothers forgiving murderers. I saw children holding the hands of absent fathers. I saw strangers giving of themselves to each other. And I understood that pain is not punishment. It is language, an instrument of transformation. Jesus showed me that true faith is not born from visible miracles, but from silent surrender. From choosing to love even when it doesn't make sense, from saying yes in the midst of chaos. And then he showed me myself, not the body, but a luminous version, without weight, without guilt, without ego. And for a brief moment, I loved myself. I accepted myself. I saw who I was without the fear, without the facade. And that was almost unbearable. It was so beautiful. You have seen the truth. But the truth is not an end. It is a beginning. That was the last thing I felt from him before everything started to disappear. The light closed like a petal. The presence grew more distant, and a light wind, or something like wind, began to push me back. My time there was over, and a new mission was about to begin. As the light receded, I felt something I hadn't expected. Sadness. I didn't want to go back. Not because I was afraid of the physical pain or of life itself, but because there, on that other plane, everything made sense. There were no masks, there was no pretense. Love was the air, truth was the ground, and I was whole. But the choice had already been made. I had said yes, and that yes now carried a new kind of responsibility. It was no longer about me. It was about what I would do with what I had been given. A whirlwind of thoughts invaded me, even without words. How am I going to explain this? Who will believe me? They will call me crazy, a liar, an opportunist, and at the same time, a serene certainty enveloped me. You don't need to convince. Just tell. The rest is not up to you. The feeling of returning was strange, like entering a body that was too tight, like trying to fit into a shoe that was 2 sizes too small. My expanded spirit now had to fit back into flesh, bones, and a nervous system. I began to hear sounds, muffled, distant, alarms, agitated voices, and then a sudden impact as if my chest had been hit with a sledgehammer. My heart. I jerked back. My eyes flew open. White lights, screams of astonishment, doctors all around me. One of them dropped his instruments. Another began to cry. They had been resuscitating me for over 10 minutes. They had given up. And then I came back. The shock was general. But for me, the shock was different. How would I explain what I experienced? I tried to speak. My throat was dry. I wanted to tell him right there in the ICU bed that I had seen Jesus, that I had understood, that everything I had denied was real. But I held back, because at that moment, when I saw the suspicious, skeptical, pragmatic faces, I realized that this mission would require more than courage. It would require rebirth, and I still didn't know how much it would cost me. The first few days after returning were strange. Physically, I was a wreck. My body ached. My mind still felt out of alignment with what we call reality, but what bothered me most wasn't the pain. It was the silence. The silence between what I had experienced and the world that awaited me. The doctors treated me like a clinical miracle. "This is unbelievable," the cardiologist said. 12 minutes without a heartbeat and you're back, fully conscious with no apparent neurological damage. This doesn't make sense. I just looked at him thinking, you don't know half of what doesn't make sense. On the first visit, my assistant, Emily, came into the room crying. She hugged me and said, "You almost died, Tom. How lucky you were." I meant it wasn't luck. I meant I'd been there, and I'd come back with a truth that burns like fire inside me. But he didn't say. Not yet. On the third night, alone, I asked for paper and pen. I wrote everything down. Every detail, every feeling. I wanted to record it before logic, my old ally, started trying to erase what I had experienced. On the 5th day, I was discharged. I returned home with an exhausted body and a restless soul. The first person I tried to tell the truth to was a longtime friend, Dr. Mason, a theoretical physicist and a staunch atheist. I told him everything, word for word. I hoped he would listen with an open mind. Eventually, he laughed. "Thomas, you were hallucinating, man. That's what a failing brain does. You more than anyone know that." No, I knew, but now knew more. Others reacted with discomfort. "Are you really okay? Maybe it's trauma. Be careful what you say, Tom. It might hurt your career." That's when I understood. The world only accepts what fits in its boxes, and my experience overflowed all of them, so I kept quiet. For weeks, I avoided interviews, declined invitations to new debates, turned off my cell phone. I went to a small cabin in Mount Hood, Oregon, which I inherited from a distant uncle. There, in the silence of the mountains, I tried to understand what to do with this truth, how to tell it without being ridiculed, how to live with it throbbing inside me if the world doesn't want to hear it. And one of those nights, sitting in front of the fireplace, a question struck me like a bolt of lightning. Did you come back to please the world or to change it? In that instant, I knew what I needed to do, not to convince, but to testify, and above all, to obey. At the cabin on Mount Hood, time seemed to move differently. The days were long but not empty. There was a kind of purging going on quietly, a dismantling of everything I had been. There, without the noise of the city, without the pressure of academia, without the judgmental eyes of the scientific world, I began to listen to myself for the first time in decades. The intellectual, sarcastic, rationalist Thomas was crumbling. And beneath him, someone I didn't know emerged, but who seemed to have always been there. I spent weeks writing, not an article, not a book, but a testimony, a cry from the soul, trying to translate the unspeakable. I wrote during the day, read the Gospels at night, and to my surprise, those words that I had previously despised now gained another light. It was no longer theology. It was code. Spiritual language encoded over the centuries, waiting for awakened hearts to understand what had been hidden there all along. Jesus was not just a historical figure. He was not a symbol. He was someone who I met, and that carried an immense weight. At first, solitude felt like punishment, but then I realized it was a retreat. It was preparation. I was being deconstructed. My identity, my ego, my resume, everything was being put to the test. And every time I tried to hold on to old Thomas, I felt the pain of the lie. One day, after more than 2 months there, something changed. I dreamed, not of Jesus, not of light, I dreamed of the university audience, of my students, of the readers of my books, all of them looking at me. Some were confused, others were angry, and one question hung over them all. And now, I woke up sweating. The sun hadn't even risen yet. I went to the lake near the cabin and dove in with the clothes I was wearing. The water was freezing cold, biting, but when I surfaced, I knew it was time. Time to come back, but not as the man he once was. I was no longer the skeptic on stage, nor the scientist seeking applause. I was someone who died and brought something back from there. And even though the world was not ready to hear, I was ready to speak. Returning to the city after so much time in the silence of the mountains was like emerging into a world that no longer suited me. The noise, the rush, the screens, the distracted faces, everything seemed to scream how far away we are from ourselves. But I knew that my mission would begin there, not on the stage, not in the universities, but among the people, the real ones, the ones who are tired, lost, thirsty for something that logic cannot explain. I returned to Los Angeles with a small suitcase, 2 notebooks full of stuff and a burning heart. I spent weeks trying to figure out how to do this without looking crazy, without losing the little credibility I had left. And then, one morning, I had an idea. Record a video. Simple. No cuts, no editing. Just me and the truth. I positioned the cell phone on the tripod. I took a deep breath, and I started. My name is Thomas Reed. I was a professor of neuroscience at UCLA. I spent my life denying God, ridiculing faith and teaching that death was the end. But a few months ago, my heart stopped for 12 minutes, and during that time, I saw something that changed absolutely everything I believed. I spoke for almost an hour. No script, no interruptions. I told everything, the light, the presence, the revelation, the choice. And I finished with a look straight into the camera. I'm not here to convince you. I'm here because I received something that I can't keep. If this touches you, do with it what your heart tells you. I posted the video anonymously on a newly created YouTube channel called simply What I Saw When I Died, and I went to sleep. The next day, it had 20,000 views. 2 days later, 100,000. Within a week, more than 1 million. Comments came from all corners of the country. People shared their own experiences, their doubts, their pain. I thought I was going crazy, but this gave me peace. My father died and I never believed he could be somewhere. Now I want to believe. I'm a skeptic, but something about this story made me cry, and I don't even know why. The video went viral. It reached journalists, podcasters, religious leaders, famous atheists, and everyone wanted to know, who was that man? When the media found out it was me, the atheist scientist, the author of The Spirit Delusion, the news exploded. CNN, Fox talk shows, the invitations started pouring in. But I didn't want the spotlight, I just wanted to complete the mission. I accepted one invitation, a short program broadcast on YouTube by a charismatic pastor from Alabama, who was also a psychologist. There, live, uncut, I told the story again, and this time, and with my name, my face, everything out in the open. The following week, I received over 50,000 emails. Something had been activated, and my mission had barely begun. By this time, my story had crossed borders. Some called me enlightened, others a charlatan, and many a traitor to science. But none of this affected me like the invitation I received on a rainy November morning. It was from PBS, one of the most respected television networks in the US. They were hosting a live special on science and spirituality, and they wanted me to participate in a debate. The other guest? Dr. Alan Carr, my former mentor, and one of the most influential voices in modern atheism. I accepted, not out of ego, but because I knew that this would be the moment where my transformation would be tested in front of the man who once shaped my way of thinking. The studio was cold, the lights were intense, the scenery was sober. Carr walked in with his usual confidence, a skeptical smile, a sharp gaze. When we shook hands, I saw something in his eyes beyond contempt. I saw hurt. Maybe because I had broken with the club, maybe because I had defied his logic, maybe because I had changed. The interview began with neutral questions about my experience, about the neurological effects of NDEs, about spirituality and science. I answered calmly, without any pretensions of proving anything, just counting. Carr didn't attack directly, but with each of my responses came an irony, a subtle cut. You believe you have seen Jesus. But isn't that just a symptom of emotional deprivation projected onto the archetypal figure of the savior? Do you think thousands of years of neuroscience were overtaken by 12 minutes of ischemia? Thomas, aren't you just getting old and afraid of dying? I took a deep breath. I didn't react, because something inside me knew. It wasn't him I was arguing against. It was who I was. And then, when the presenter asked, "Dr. Reed, do you have anything that you haven't said publicly yet? Something that you saw and kept?" Silence. I looked at the camera, at the invisible audience, at the millions of people watching at home, and I replied, "Yes, I have one last vision. Something I saw at the end, when the light was fading. I saw the future." The anchor leaned in. Carr smiled skeptically, but the studio fell silent. I saw people blinded by pride. I saw knowledge used to dominate, not to liberate. I saw humanity forgetting who it is, but I also saw it as a wave of awakening. Ordinary, simple people seeking something greater. I saw his name being remembered, not out of fear, but out of love. And the final image was a question left for all of us. Do you want to stay asleep, or are you ready to wake up? Carr didn't answer. For the first time, he was silent. And in that silence, I understood. It doesn't matter if I win the argument. It is important to touch the heart. After that night on PBS, something changed. Not just in me, but in the entire country. My testimony stopped being just a curiosity. It began to become a spark. Something began to spread, quietly but relentlessly. It wasn't about religion. It was about to wake up. I've received messages from doctors who had never believed in anything beyond the tangible, but who have begun to rethink the meaning of life. A nurse from Chicago wrote to me that after watching the interview, she prayed for the first time in 20 years, and the next day, a terminally ill patient who hadn't spoken in weeks opened his eyes, looked at her, and said, "He's real." A former military man from Texas who had attempted suicide twice sent me a video with tears in his eyes saying, "I don't know how to explain it, but after your video, I was able to breathe again." Churches that had been empty began to welcome young people. People who had never set foot in a temple felt drawn not by dogma but by truth, by thirst, and not by religion itself, but by connection. Of course, the attacks came. Articles trying to dismantle my credibility, accusations of opportunism, delirium, emotional marketing. But now I didn't react. I just kept telling the story, answering whoever needed it, silently, faithfully. I received invitations for major programs, books, documentaries. I turned down almost all of them. I didn't want fame. I wanted coherence. So I started doing something simple. Every week on Wednesdays I would post a short video, sometimes a reflection, sometimes a memory of the experience, sometimes just silence with a phrase in the background, "You are not alone." These videos started playing millions, but the most impressive thing was what started to happen in small communities, people coming together to talk, atheists and religious people listening to each other, people going back to hugging their fathers they hadn't spoken to, couples starting over, people forgiving, people feeling, and in some cases, something even stranger, cures. A woman with terminal cancer who dreamed of a light just like the one I described, and on her next scan there was no sign of the disease. A congenitally blind teenager who, while listening to one of my stories through headphones in the hospital, described colors with precision, colors he had never seen before. The doctors were at a loss for explanation. I can't prove any of this, and maybe you don't even need to, because what I saw is becoming what others are living, and that, for me, it's already miracle enough. For a long time, I hesitated to tell the final part of the experience, not out of fear, but out of respect, because what I saw there, in the last moments before returning to my body, was not just for me. It was a call, a warning, a request. I was about to leave that light. I had already made my choice. I already knew I would return with a mission, but before everything fell apart, something was shown. It was fast, intense, painful, and beautiful at the same time. I saw the world, a few decades from now, not in technical details, but in essence. I saw giant technological but cold cities, people connected by networks, but deeply lonely. I saw empty hearts searching for meaning in screens, children growing up without knowing what silence is. Adults escaping from themselves through excess. I saw an entire generation being taught to doubt everything, including their own worth. But I also saw something appear, like a crack in the darkness. Small groups, people gathering in silence, praying, meditating, hugging, sharing real pain. I saw young people put down their phones for an hour just to listen to someone. I saw artists creating music that touched souls. I saw schools teaching empathy before the equation. He, again. Not as before, in light, but through the eyes of others, through gestures, through acts of compassion, through silences full of presence. And I understood the last message. I will return, but not as many expect. I will return in each one who remembers what it is to love without conditions. That was the final vision. After that I came back. I breathed again in this body. I faced everything. I told everything. And now I end this story with my heart at peace, not to convince you, but to leave a seed. If you've made it this far, maybe that seed is already germinating inside you. Life is not just what we see. Death is not the end. And faith is not a refuge for the weak. It is the courage of those who decide to love, even without guarantees. Whatever your story, your pain, your doubt, you are not alone. And if all this that I told you touches at least on life, then my mission will be accomplished. If you've come this far, it's because something inside you felt it. So take advantage and subscribe to the channels, or you don't miss the next reports. There's a lot of deep stuff coming. If this story touched you, comment below. I also want to remember who I am. This will show that you are waking up with us. And if this video made sense to you, leave your like. This helps to get this message to more people. And now, watch the next video that appears on the screen. He completes this journey in a way you don't expect. Trust me,